Hello, everybody. This is Andrew Olson, the founder of Pan Africa Football, and as part of our detailed coverage of the upcoming African Nations Championship in East Africa, we have a special guest today. This gentleman's football journey has taken him all around the world to England, to the United States, and now where he is currently based, Denmark, as well as his native Gambia. So for our discussion, we have with us Matar Mboj, a well-known coach who led the Gambia to third place at the 2021 U20 Africa Cup of Nations. Matar, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, and we're excited to have you offer your insights here as we have a series of discussions for the Chan. So today we're going to be talking about how this is really East Africa's big moment, the tournament, of course, and it's going to be co-hosted by Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Something feels a little bit different about this edition of the Chan, Matar. It's going to be hosted by East Africa. It's going to be hosted by multiple countries. And, it's been a long time since East Africa has really had their opportunity in the spotlight to host a tournament like this. Rwanda hosted the 2016 edition of this tournament, but other than Ethiopia in 1976 when they hosted the Africa Cup of Nations, East Africa hasn't hosted a tournament that feels quite this big. So, do you feel like it feels like this is really East Africa's opportunity? Do you think this is a real meaningful moment in the history of football in East Africa?
Yeah, Andrew, great starting point for sure. The word I want to take from you is opportunity, because I think for so long within Africa, the limelight has been outside of East Africa, has been with the North Africans. Right now, Morocco dominating, with the likes of South Africa being the first African country to host a World Cup. And then you look at the dominance of West African talents who we all know, who are playing in the highest level in the Premier League, in Serie A, and in the Bundesliga. Now it's East Africa's time to shine for sure, and it's a time for them to come together because, as you said, Rwanda hosted it by themselves, and it kick-started their almost era now where they are really well set up infrastructure-wise. They were also able to kick on and improve their league. But now with Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda co-hosting a tournament, all eyes of the world will be on East Africa for sure. And it also brings a lot of pressure in terms of delivering the tournament off the field, which in itself will be a huge challenge. But all those countries also need to present on the field a competitive team, because nobody wants to see the host country or countries in this instant go out in the group stages. Its tournaments are much more lively and much more interesting and followed if they can have the local support throughout the whole tournament and for as long as possible. And so they've got pressure off the field. CAF will be also putting them under heavy scrutiny to say that, okay, can we trust these countries to put on the AFCON in a couple of years' time? And honestly, we look at the track record of CAF, there will be no worries or no hesitation if the tournament does not deliver to expectations. There will be moves made to relocate the tournament, no doubt. And for sure, it's a huge pressure for the countries that are involved.
A lot of the attention, like you said, is going to be on how the hosting goes. To avoid any incidents, avoid creating any doubts. Because, like you said, we've already had one or two moments in the build up to this tournament where it seemed like East Africa was in serious danger of losing this hosting opportunity. But, also another area you mentioned is on the pitch. Like you mentioned, Morocco reaching getting fourth place at the 2022 World. We've seen so much with West Africa, Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, who've had excellent moments in the spotlight at the World Cup. South Africa hosted the 2010 edition of the World Cup. Every region of Africa, it seems like, has had their moment. But would you say that East Africa has had a moment like this? Do you think this is the real moment for them to not only prove themselves off the pitch with their ability to host a tournament, but also to show that they have the quality to compete with Africa's best on the pitch as well?
For sure. Yeah, and I like the way that you put it, because in terms of players, I'm sure we talked about Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria. People can highlight and they can recollect players from those countries. But if you talk about Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, I mean, in my mind, probably the most notable is Victor Wanyama out of those three countries. But the list is quite short. It's quite is not as full as you can find in West Africa, in North Africa, even in Southern Africa, where you have their stars, most talented players scattered all over the world, particularly at the highest level in Europe. So now it's a case of, can we get a player who's performing for one of these teams at a high level, who can find their way to the Premier League? Why not? It's possible. It's happened before with Senegalese players who find a route straight into Ligue 1, for example, or players from DR Congo who find a route directly into Belgium. Why can't it be for Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda? It's time for those players to show that they are also hungry. And these are some of the challenges and some of the barriers that we talk about when I speak with other coaches about players from East Africa. West African players, you can see they are hungry. And when I've worked with groups of African players, it's often the West Africans who stand out because of that hunger. And if you think about East African players, a lot of the time they are actually quite comfortable. They get to a level and then they're not able to push themselves any further, no matter how much you try as a coach, as an official, as somebody who's trying to help. So for sure, it's going to be key to see the hunger that these players present themselves with, because they're the hosts. All their matches in the group stages are being played in their own country. They're not going to have to deal with acclimatizing in another climate, in another country. So it's a real big advantage for them, but there's also the pressure for them to deliver, for sure.
This tournament is really considered to be sort of a dress rehearsal, so to say, for the 2027 Africa Cup of Nations, when these same nations will host the competition. That's going to be a special moment, but I think with this Chan, since it features exclusively domestic-based players, these East African nations, they have a real opportunity to impress on the pitch as well. Because we see in the Africa Cup of Nations so many African national teams that have dual national players, things like that. Whereas with the East African nations, they depend a lot more on players from their domestic leagues. We're seeing similar dual national players come in, players who are moving abroad early perhaps from these countries. But do you think that this circumstance, being exclusively domestic based players, do you think that East Africa can really demonstrate how far they've come, maybe a bit more than at the Africa Cup of Nations, perhaps? Do you think this tilts the advantage a bit more towards them?
For sure, because I think if you look at club level, for the likes of Uganda, for example, Vipers, I think, is quite well known. They've done well in previous CAF competitions. Everybody knows Gor Mahia in Kenya, serial champions, serial qualifiers for CAF Champions League, good track record. Then you look at Tanzania, the big guns, Simba, Young Africans. Simba just reached the final of the CAF Confederation Cup, lost out to RS Berkane. But these are two massive clubs in terms of following and also name and tradition in Africa. Azam is also joining the table in terms of trying to be competitive at that level. So in terms of the world knowing their clubs, their names, of course, it's not going to be a surprise in terms of seeing players from those clubs competing. Now, can we see them now transition at the highest level? Can they be attractive to some of the biggest teams in Europe? Or will it be a case of, okay, they flatter to deceive, which has been the case in the past, when you have players from the likes of, as I said, Simba or Young Africans. Maybe they've been accused of being quite comfortable with the contracts that they're earning in those clubs. So therefore, they're not really hungry or determined to advertise themselves as a player would from Senegal, for example, who's playing maybe in an academy or who's playing in the lower leagues. It's going to be a real mix, and it's going to be interesting to see the job that the coaches have in terms of motivating these players to give the best that they can in every game.
And like you mentioned, this is such an opportunity on the world stage. There's going to be people from all over the world who are watching this tournament for the first time, having covered a lot of African club football, at Pan Africa football. We're seeing players be rumored, from East Africa, being linked with places like Ligue 1. These clubs are watching, even the CAF Champions League, CAF Confederation Cup, and now this is really that huge moment. So, do you think that these players are conscious of that? That this is playing on their minds? That this is motivating them? Maybe distracting them as well? Particularly these East African players. We've only had, a handful who've really moved directly from clubs like, clubs in Tanzania like Simba. You take a player like Mbwana Samata or somebody like that. Do you think this is going to be on the players' minds?
Of course it will, because they'll be going to bed at night dreaming about the performance in the game, and maybe they could be over exuberant. Maybe some of them may look to play a little bit more individualistic in terms of wanting to shine out and play to their own strengths, but they really have to sacrifice and really have to work towards the team. Because the team goals, the further the team goes, the more focus there is on that team. And then, of course, everybody will look at who the key players are. In my experience, that has been a key challenge. I remember when I reached the semi-final of the 20s AFCON, and it was really clear to see that the players, having reached that stage, they did want to show what they had. So maybe one or two would want to keep the ball a little bit longer because it's a big stage. Maybe one or two would want to say, I want to impress. It's just something that's unavoidable because there is a lot at stake. And of course, you also have outside influences. So you have family, friends, family members in themselves, agents who will be talking to them and explaining that, look, this is your big chance. Make sure you score a goal or two or three. Make sure you make an assist. Make sure you have a clean sheet. So all of that is going to be added pressure and added burden on the heads of these players. So to get the good performance, I think we're going to see in the first round of matches some nervousness, some anxiety before players are eventually comfortable, and then they'll be able to do the best for themselves. I think for the likes of Simba, Young Africa's players, I'm sure they're not going to be fazed by a big stadium, full capacity stadium, but maybe some of the others might be, and they're going to be the players who are going to be relied on in terms of those experienced players who've been outside, competed in CAF competitions, who know what a full stadium looks and sounds like and feels like. They're going to be the ones to alleviate some of their teammates, and the coaches again and the coaching staff will have a big job in terms of calming everybody down, making sure that they're composed, making sure that they can execute the tactics on the day, because in this tournament you really have to deliver.
We want to take a look at each of the East African nations individually, just kind of take a look at the situation for each nation heading into this competition. And, I wanted to start with Kenya. The Harambee Stars, they've turned the reins over to Benny McCarthy. He's one of the examples that we're seeing of foreign coaches who are not avoiding this tournament. They want to take part in this tournament and guide their teams at this competition. And when it comes to Kenya, Benny McCarthy is a player, a famous player, of course, with South Africa, with Bafana Bafana. Had a lot of success at Amazulu as a coach. He's coached as an assistant at Manchester United. It seems like Kenya has really brought him in to be not just a coach, but to really lead sort of a transition, kind of give him full control of the national team, and to be sort of a charismatic leader who can reshape everything. Do you think Benny McCarthy is the right sort of figure for Kenya to bring in? Do you think he's the guy who can really kind of transform things with so much credibility as a player, also as a coach? Do you think Benny McCarthy is the right person for Kenya to turn to find success and to lead the Harambee Stars into a new era, starting with this tournament?
Yeah, no, I like the appointment when Kenya made it because they're looking at coaches within Africa, and for sure, I think he comes with a charismatic figure and history. Everybody knows his playing history. He's won the Champions League before. He's coached at Manchester United, as you said, at the highest level with some of the biggest players in the world. I think Ronaldo amongst them. So for sure, he has the pedigree. Now, in terms of his salary, I think they're really making sure that he's being put to work and he's not resting when this tournament is on. So, in terms of taking the reins, I can see that they really want the domestic players in Kenya to form the base of their national team. So, for sure, it makes sense that the head coach of the senior team also takes charge of the Chan team because he can have full visibility of which players are ready to step up. They will also, because it works two ways, the coach has to know the team and the players, but the players also have to get used to the coach. He's a big character. He comes with a big reputation, and some players will just not be able to handle his way. They will just not be able to handle the demands. The fact that he was so being exposed to the highest level, playing Champions League football, playing for these big clubs, and even when he was in South Africa playing for quality teams, doing well, as you said, it comes with demands. It comes with a guy who is not going to compromise, a guy who's not going to allow and tolerate people being below par or below standard, being forgiving. I think the unforgiving nature of football is within Benny McCarthy. He's seen it, he's done it, he knows what it takes. So when he speaks, the players will listen. But it goes back to what we talked about in terms of the hunger these players are showing. Here you have a guy who's done everything. Are they all listening? Or are some of them thinking, I know better than the coach. Oh, the coach is telling me this. They are players and they're natural. This is how the behavior is in terms of challenging. Now, with Benny and the staff that he has around him, because of course he cannot be 24/7 switched on, because I think the players will eventually lose their mind. But for sure, the staff will also have a big impact in terms of managing the players, to see who is ready, to see who has issues, who has worries, because it is one thing to also play under pressure as the host country, which they will have, but then how much will Benny McCarthy be trying to ease that pressure? Because he's also going to be coming at them with his own demands. If players are not making recovery runs, if they're not tracking back when it's a transition, defensive transition, if they're not keeping the ball well enough, if they're not finishing their chances, he's going to be somebody who's going to be right at them. And he's the kind of coach who strikes me as, even if Kenya wins the opening game 3-0, it cannot get any better. He'll still be the next day on the training ground, picking up faults and talking about this could have been better, that could have been better. And that insatiable desire to get better and better is going to be something that the players are going to really have to stand up and rise to the occasion.
I think, maybe if a person with the charisma of Benny McCarthy comes into, maybe a European national team, you're going to have a lot of players just say, I don't really care what this guy says. He's kind of a blowhard. He's just all talk. Do you think with these Kenyan players, do you think they're going to be a little more open to Benny McCarthy making his voice heard all the time? Or do you think there is, like you said, there might be a little bit of a risk of he might just kind of come across too strong and potentially alienate the players?
Yeah, really good question. And I think for sure his demands, he will be able to see in terms of having the provisional squad training with him. He's been in the country for a while now, watching players, so he's seen all these guys in action. He's seen them on the training ground, obviously, as well as their own club environment. So he will know the kind of characters who can handle him. And maybe there are some players who've not made the squad who potentially fans and analysts are looking at and saying, why is this person not in the squad? And it could be because Benny McCarthy has seen that they're not going to be able to handle it. They're not going to be able to handle the tournament pressures because they just don't have that mental strength or that character to be able to carry the load. For sure, the 11 that he puts on the field for the first game is going to be asked to run until they have nothing left, and the subs coming on. That's going to be a clear instruction from minute one. And then it's about managing the team. And then it's about making sure that his character, he doesn't, like you said, go too much, doesn't go overboard, doesn't push the players to the breaking point. And for sure, the players will be overwhelmed and will be wanting to do the best that they could, but they must listen. And in any squad environment, you always have one or two players, depending on the result, they may look for excuses. They may say, oh, the coach played back three today. I don't know why we did back three. And then these are situations where it's just human nature. It happens even at the highest level, even in Pep Guardiola's teams. There are players who will question the coach. It will come in terms of the Kenya national team and all the national teams. But then it's about, okay, how can we manage and bridge the gap in these teams to go out and perform every game? Kenya has a tough group, by the way. DR Congo, Morocco, Angola, Zambia. These are all massive, massive football countries. And if they miss a step, they could find themselves out of the tournament after 4 games. After the first round, they can find themselves out. So they know from minute one there is going to be a real, real pressure cooker environment, and no less the head coach is going to be the one who's going to lead that.
You brought up an excellent point at the end there, Mata. You know, Group A is loaded. It's almost a little unbalanced, the groups, it seems, because Group A, honestly, all of those teams in the
Agreed.
group could have a shout of potentially winning this tournament. You know, DR Congo, you mentioned they've won it. They've really made this tournament their own. Zambia, of course. It's going to be a very difficult group for Kenya compared to the other host nations, it seems. So there's not going to be any easy matches for them. You know, I want to look next at Uganda. Uganda's a country that's has a football scene that's really starting to produce a lot of talented young players. You know, at the tournament, you coached the Gambia at the 2021 U20 Africa Cup of Nations. Uganda made it to the final. Really surprised everybody, came out of nowhere. You know, and they've really followed up on that trend. Now that they've gotten the notice all over the world, we're seeing more and more Ugandan players moving abroad. So when it comes to Uganda, the money isn't quite there as much. They can't bring in players like Young Africans or Simba. So you see more young players thriving in this league. Do you think that's going to help be in favor for the Cranes at this tournament? And do you think that's going to maybe create a more youthful look for this team that can make an impression when fueled by the home support?
Well, as you said, the home support is going to be a huge factor for them in terms of giving them that extra energy. I really worry for Uganda. Having, as you said, come up against, well, they were got to the final of the tournament that I coached in, and the head coach deservedly got coach of the tournament. They eventually lost to Ghana in the final, but they did an incredible job because it was also the first time that they were actually qualified for the U20s. In terms of the evolution, now that coach is taking over the CHAN, so he's a capable coach. Tactically, he has that prowess and the aptitude to go far in the tournament. I just worry about the ability of their players to handle pressure. Just from my experience, when you see that Ugandan teams do well, we've just seen their under 17s also qualify for the World Cup. They have an ability to play as a collective, play disciplined football, but then when it's left to them to rise up and there's a setback, it can be difficult. That's just what I've seen in my experience, and I really hope that they can prove me wrong in that aspect, because this tournament is going to bring up lots of challenges for them, lots of pressure that we already talked about, and their players are going to have to rise to the occasion. They don't have any other choice, because what's on the line now in terms of, yes, of course, the three co-hosts, yes, as a collective, the tournament has to be delivered to high expectations. But each of these countries is also fighting for space, fighting for attention. Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. Well, what are Ugandan players about? Maybe scouts and coaches like myself, practitioners, we've got biased opinions already on what a Ugandan player is. It's up to those players to change those opinions. Positive, negative. If somebody has a positive image of Ugandan players, okay, time to reinforce it. If somebody has a image where, okay, a perception that they can do better, okay, can you prove them wrong, or can you do better? It's the country that of the three hosts that I worry about the most, because, and I wonder if it's reflected in the society, whether it's quite laid back and it's quite relaxed environment. Whereas I look at West Africa, for example, where players literally will kill themselves on the field when it comes to football. Whereas Ugandans and East Africans, in my experience, are a little bit more lackadaisical, a little bit more relaxed and not so much under pressure. But they do have talent. Technically, they have the ability, they have the running power, the physical capacity, and as I said before, the key of the 20s that reached the final in 2021 was that tactical discipline, and that was brought through by the coach.
Yeah, interesting observations, Mata. I think you make some very good points that maybe, you know, like we're going to mention with Tanzania, there's a real thought that perhaps they could win this tournament. You know, whereas maybe with Uganda, maybe even Kenya. I mean, we do have Benny McCarthy coming in. The expectations will be high, but with Uganda, like you said, maybe it's a bit more relaxed. I think they have a bit more of a favorable group as well compared to when we were talking about Kenya. They have Niger, South Africa. We've seen them, like some nations, not quite take this tournament as seriously as other big footballing nations in Africa. But, to wrap up our discussion of Uganda, there's clearly going to be some expectations since they're going to be playing in front of their home support. What do you think is a realistic objective for this Cranes team when they head into the tournament?
For me, if they can get out of their group, that would be an achievement because in terms of they're actually one of the teams along with Tanzania. Kenya is there for the first time in the Chan, but Uganda's yet to go past the group stages. So I think first of all that would be a success. We talked about Benny McCarthy taking the Kenyan team, Avram Grant takes the Zambia team, and a host of other A national teams. Eric Shell is taking the Nigerian team. I wonder if Paul Put of Uganda said, no, thank you. You can ask the other coaches to take the Chan team because maybe he thought that there wasn't so much chance and he didn't want to have a dismal performance and then all of a sudden he's under pressure as a head coach himself. As I said, I go back to the fact that they have technical players, but they have yet to deliver at the highest level in African football. But what an opportunity in front of the home fans, in front of their own stadium, in their home country. I mean, if now is not the time for Ugandan players to perform, then I'm not sure when the time will be.
You mentioned Paul Put, how he's not there, whereas Benny McCarthy's there for Kenya. We'll certainly be discussing more about this, foreign coach versus domestic-based coach. But the Cranes are in very good hands, like you mentioned, with Morley Biakwaso, who's achieved some great things, like you mentioned. So the Cranes are certainly in good hands, but it's going to be a very big challenge for him, now that there's going to be expectations, whereas when his team made it so far at the U20 Africa Cup of Nations, there were virtually zero expectations, I would say.
When he got to the final, I reached out to a couple of Ugandan journalists that were there at the tournament, and I said that, oh, your future national team coach is here. I really believe that he has the capabilities, based from what I've seen, to take over the Ugandan national team for sure. And this is also an opportunity for him to put himself in the frame because I think he's the most successful Ugandan coach at national team level in terms of reaching an African final. Silver medal there. A lot of those players I think have gone on and graduated and are now at the senior level. So for sure, it's also a big opportunity for Coach Morley.
We're going to close up this discussion with, of course, Tanzania. Now, many would say that the Taifa Stars, they have the most potential of the three host nations to make a deep run at this competition. Like you mentioned earlier, Simba, young Africans, they've done big things. They've competed at the highest stage of African club football in the CAF Champions League and the Confederation Cup. We saw Simba reach the final, come up just short. So there's a lot of confidence in this team. There's players who are potentially thinking about moves abroad. Like we mentioned, we're seeing players who are being rumored to be linked to European clubs, which is something we saw very rarely in the past. In Tanzania, we're sensing an atmosphere, having covered, the comments coming out of their camp and in the media there, that they think they could win this tournament. And so let's get right to the point when it comes to Tanzania. You think Tanzania can realistically harbor ambitions of winning this entire tournament?
Yes, if I put my neck on the line there, for sure Tanzania is there. And the reason why is because of the Simba Young Africans connection and also the fervent home support that's going to follow them in every game. I really think that we talk about club rivalries. I really do think that, first of all, the players need to put aside the intense rivalry between the two clubs, Simba Young Africans. But I think Tanzanians, from what I've seen, they have that tendency to come together and forget club allegiances when it comes to national team. And I think that's going to be also the case for fans. I think we're going to see when it's red versus yellow, Simba versus Young Africans, I think we're going to see the fans coming together. And when the team eventually starts performing well and gets some wins under their belt, they'll be able to unite the country. And I think that unification and that goodwill, that force from the fans is going to generate so much energy and so much motivation for the players that they can go as far as they can in this tournament for sure. I agree with you in terms of setting them up as one of the favourites for the competition for sure. They have the capabilities, they have the players, they have a coach who's also taken the senior national team also, who's proven himself, proven his pedigree. He qualified the team to the AFCON as well, so that's coming up in Morocco. So they have everything. They've got top facilities in Tanzania, one of the top stadiums as well in the region in East Africa. I think the final is going to be held in Kenya, but I think that's because it's part of a deal where I expect the AFCON final to be held in Tanzania Stadium. Um, it could all still change, but they have everything there, Tanzania, in terms of putting up the best performance out of the three countries in this chat for sure.
And you mentioned of course the young Africans and Simba sort of connection. There's going to be plenty of players from both clubs on the team, along with elsewhere in the Ligi Kubara in Tanzania. Sometimes we've seen, Egypt, for example, you have players from Zamalek and Al Ahly.
Yeah.
Do you think, this rivalry could kind of carry over into the team? Do you see that being a potential problem in any way, or do you think just the occasion, such a massive occasion for the country and its football, do you think that's going to be irrelevant in this competition?
No, it's a really important point that you make, and I love the reference you made for Egypt and Al Ahly and Zamalek. And Egypt traditionally have always done well at tournaments because it's a country where everyone has a huge national pride, and they're very very patriotic in terms of making sure that the country, no matter what rivalries or differences you have, the country and the flag is what you play for. I'm sure there's been meetings held in the Tanzania camp. I'm sure the coach has spoken about it. Maybe not, even if not now, he's been speaking about it for a while, about the fact that club rivalries need to be put aside. And especially now when the world is watching as co-host of a tournament, the Tanzanians, they must deliver. There's nothing else. There's no ifs and buts. You must be able to compete with a player. If you play for Simba and you have to set up a cross for a young Africans player to score, that's your job, and you're doing it for your country. And I think there will be a rallying call from officials as well, from clubs on both sides, because they will be the ones, first of all, who have to show the example to the players to say that, listen, we're coming together. And then the players will have to follow suit. Of course, it will not be 100%, and it has to be genuine and authentic. I wonder, when they sit at the dinner table or at breakfast, I wonder if Simba guys go on one corner and young Africans guy go on another corner, because that can also be a challenge. Um, it's interesting. Also, you mentioned the Al Ahly Zamalek dynamic, but for sure they have to come together. They have to find a way to come and perform, come together as a team, and at the end, it's the national pride. If Tanzania goes as far as they can in the tournament, it's good for Simba, it's good for young Africans, it's good for Azam, it's good for Singida, Fountain Gate, it's good for all the teams in Tanzania, it's good for Tanzanian football.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to close out the discussion, I think it's clear that you believe that Tanzania is the team that's most likely to go far out of the three East African teams. So I'm going to ask you to stick your neck out, Mata. How far do you think Tanzania will go in this tournament?
I can say semi-finals for them. For Tanzania, semi-final.
Maybe they're capable of going on and winning it if everything goes right. We saw them. We've been covering the pre-tournament matches they've had. They defeated Senegal. They defeated Uganda. They're certainly looking very good. So I think confidence will be high, and we'll see how they do in the group stage. And then, if you get that momentum through the group stage, anything can happen, really. So as long as they keep their objectives one
Of
by
course.
one,
There's just a
I
couple of teams who I'm just putting a slightly above them, especially with DR Congo. who are just right next door. They're not having to travel so far. So for them, it's not a home tournament, but they've not had to go so far to travel. And they've also had experiences within Tanzania. I think a lot of their clubs go to Tanzania for pre-season. A lot of the players go on holiday in Zanzibar and Tanzania as well. So that's why I think DR Congo are really looking strong. They have always been strong. They've won it twice. And if Tanzania can avoid DRC in the knockouts, then they have the potential to go further than the semi-finals.
Is there any other nation that you would consider among the favorites for this tournament?
I think dark horses are Zambia, because you cannot underestimate the tactical acumen and experience of Avram Grant. I think he's also been in Zambia for quite a while, as opposed to Benny McCarthy, who's just new into Kenya, well, a few months into it. So Avram Grant, I think, is really understanding the Zambian players, the level of football. I also look at the fact that Eric Shell has taken the Nigeria team, and that to me puts them amongst the favourites because to me he's one of the most tactically astute coaches in Africa, and for sure he'll be able to come up with a style and a system that can allow the Nigerian players to play to their potential. And when they play to their potential, Nigeria is a hotbed of talent. They're going to be difficult to contain. I worry about the defending champion Senegal only when I look at the results that they've had in terms of, yes, they've been quite solid recently, but in their last games against Uganda and Tanzania, they lost both games, and it's an alarm bell in terms of what's expected of them now. I also think it's difficult to maintain the level of excellence that they've had. It's not to say that they won't, but they were winning tournaments left, right, and centre, and that seems to have slowed down a little bit. And also looking at the Moroccans, again, another very good coach in Tarek Sektouri. They've had history also winning the U23s, and I understand that they bring in majority of the U23 team to this tournament. So they will have players who also want to prove themselves, who also want to play in all these leagues we talk about, Ligue 1, Belgium, Spain, and why not also Wydad and Raja Casablanca if they're not already there. So there's just a few teams who, if they play to their potential, they could cause problems. And even you look at the likes of Niger, who reached the semi-final last time out, they could be another dark horse. I understand that the team is not in ideal conditions because a few players have had trials abroad, and the coach has made a zero tolerance policy to say that we don't want anyone distracted. And then as well as that, for me, Algeria, when I watched them in the qualification, had the opportunity to watch them close hand because they played the Gambia twice, and the football they played was at another level. And it's something that, in terms of that possession-based style, that Spanish style, it can be difficult to play against. They reached the final last time out in their own country. They didn't concede a goal, but they still ended up losing the final on penalties. So again, they've got very, very good pedigree. And again, looking at the coach Maji Bugera, he's also in the shop window to do as well as possible, because why can't he take the senior national team? I know Algeria traditionally have gone with big name coaches, and it's a position, the A national team, that takes a big paycheck. But for sure, Maji Bugera will be thinking to himself, if I go well and win this tournament, then it's only going to add to my CV. And I think there's going to be a time when eventually he's going to be in a position to take the senior national team.
Wow, excellent observations, Matt Tar. We're definitely going to be getting more deeper and into more detail about each group and each team. And yeah, I'm looking forward to some great observations there. I think all of those are definitely worthy teams to watch. You always have to consider the North African teams in contention in this case. But we will certainly get more and more into detail about each of these teams and each of these groups in our discussions. Matt Tar, is a pleasure to discuss, East Africa's big moment. Really looking forward to seeing how each East African nation does. This is the first of many discussions we're going to have on the tournament, to analyze the tournament, and I look forward to doing it more. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching our discussion, and hopefully we'll see you next time.